I have a story that isn't mine, but it happened to my uncle. He used to tell us the story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle, Mark, went on a mission at 19. They sent him to an Indian reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion named Carl. When they first got there, there was a huge rift between the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation grounds. Eventually, they came up with a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. The reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night, they were trying to get to sleep when all of a sudden, their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under their table for cover. Mark could distinctively hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people. After 5 minutes, it stopped. The next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The family got very quiet and then told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they get quiet and then tell them to leave. Mark started to think that due to their tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. Then they go to a convenience store, and they are talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused, they ask him, "Can't talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about Skinwalkers. He says they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the Skinwalkers will come for their soul. They just walked out of there, baffled. They thought it was just another scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, threw it open, and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw 3 animals run off. 2 were wolves, and 1 was a bear, but they looked strange, almost with human features. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on their 2 legs and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared them so bad that they called the mission president the next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day. For a year, nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl had been relocated to another city, and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick up Jimmy from the airport. The road they traveled went through some boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and then they go to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We're driving through some dangerous areas at night, so we can't make any stops, so if you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I'm fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak Mark out. "I'm not kidding, go do your business." Jimmy was insistent that he was fine, so they hit the road. As they were 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries. Jimmy starts complaining that he needs to go pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here, you'll have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on, "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you have to do your business next to the door, and if I say get in the car, you better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right." He opens the door and starts to do his business. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark are freaking out. "What's going on?" The mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car, to his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer, and they were going 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for about 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They hadn't spoken through the rest of the ordeal. Jimmy says, What did I just see? The mission president says, next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business. This happened in Arizona about 7 years ago while on our biannual fishing trip to the Black River out in the Fort Apache Indian Reservation. Each year we would take a little dirt road only accessible via 4x4 vehicles all the way until it ended. The only people we ever saw out there were cattle ranchers that never really went past the tree line, which was about a half-hour drive from where we camped. Needless to say, we were always way out in the boonies. There was one way in and one way out, and we camped at the very end of the road. This trip in specific was our 5th year going out to the same spot. Twice a year, and this would be about our 11th week-long trip at that spot. Never saw another soul outside of our party of 5 all 10 other times. We get up super early, sometimes a little bit before the sun. We get everything ready to fish all day, wanting to get as much fishing in as possible before it got dark. This experience happened on the 3rd day of 8. We were up eating some breakfast, instant oatmeal packets, and protein bars for those who care, and we were getting our gear ready for the day. This was when the sun wasn't quite up yet. We still had lanterns and headlamps on to see. With all of us right there, we hear footsteps coming from the road. We all look up and see 2 middle-aged Native American men walking down the road. No gear with them, both looking straight forward, not even acknowledging our existence. They walked straight past us up a trail along the river. We were spooked because we'd never seen anyone there in the many times we had been. We figured that they may have been camping up a bit further down the road. We went down the same path a bit later, and about an hour in, we hear rustling from the other side of the river. Then we see a fawn burst out of the trees and start running downstream. A few seconds later, 2 very mangly coyotes come sprinting out of the same spot, chasing the deer. They eventually cross back into the woods and disappear from view. Over the next 5 days, we never saw those 2 guys again. If they had gear, I wouldn't be suspicious of this. However, to avoid us on the way back, they would have had to go extremely out of their way to get back to the road, and it wouldn't be feasible. On top of that, the coyotes did chase the fawn back downstream where the road was. Hello, my name is Trent. What happened to me is true. I'm from a cattle and sheep ranch in Montana. I also have 4 saddle horses. The ranch that my cousin and I own is about 4,700 acres, comprising of flat crop and hay fields stretching on both sides of the Yellowstone River. The ranch is located 11 miles northeast of the town of Savage. We run a ranch that's 38 miles upriver from us. That is where this incident occurred. The leased ranch is huge, comprising of over 13,000 acres. The folks that own it are multimillionaires from Oregon who only visit it a few times per year. The ranch has a very rough terrain and 3 small creeks run through it. In the very northeast corner of it, the land flattens out and there's an old corral system. There is also a long vacant house nearby in a draw. We had leased the ranch since the mid-2000s and had no trouble until about 5 years ago. It was normal to lose a few cows in the Yellowstone breaks, but we have lost 130 since 2016. Around half of the cattle we were able to locate. The animals that we found were pretty eaten up by coyotes, but a few that we found were not. These carcasses looked a lot like the other cattle mutilations, with the skin around their eyes, the ears, and udder completely missing. It was highly unusual to lose this many cattle as they were at home throughout the winter, and there are no predators in eastern Montana that could kill a full-grown cow. All of the cattle that were missing were cows, and always between the ages of 3 and 5 years old. This event took place at the end of June last year. We had just trucked the cattle to the ranch 2 weeks prior, and I was checking on them that day. Usually my cousin or his son rode with me, but they were moving the irrigation pivot that day, so I was alone. I parked my pickup next to the corrals and unloaded my horse. This was about 9:30 a.m. My horse's name was Ace. He was a very large horse that weighed a whole ton and stood 19 hands tall. Ace was not very quick or fast. He had great endurance, and you could ride him all day through the roughest country, and he would not tire. It was a pretty usual day until about 1 p.m. when I saw something that didn't belong. About a mile away, I could see an animal bounding up a hill. My initial reaction was a deer because it was as big as one, but had proportions more like a mountain lion. I tried to ride closer to whatever it was, but I couldn't find it. It was odd, but not that crazy, so I just put it in the back of my head. The day continued normally until I returned to pick up my trailer. As I went to load Ace, I noticed that the rear axle of my trailer had just come apart. Keep in mind that I had not used it earlier that morning, so there was no reason for that to happen. It was getting pretty late, around 8 p.m., and it took about an hour to get back to the house, so I decided to leave Ace in the trailer there and take the pickup home. The corral fence was alright, but the gate latch had rusted shut to where you could not close it. I had a roll of barbed wire in my pickup, so I used it to secure the gate after I put Ace into it. As I drove home, I noticed a few large lights in the complete opposite direction from the corrals. They resembled combine lights, even though they were further apart and brighter. Also, there would be no reason for a combine to be up there. I arrived home at 10:30 without having any trouble. The next morning, my cousin, his son, and I rode up together to fix the axle and get Ace back. When we finally got to the corrals, we saw Ace wasn't there. The wire holding the gate shut had not been meddled with, so there was no logical way he could have escaped. The corral had not been used in decades, so there was grass growing inside. But that day, all the grass was turned up, and you could see where Ace had ran for a while. This was quite unusual, as Ace was always calm and quiet. We looked for him the whole day but could not find him, but we were severely limited because we were on foot. The next day, me and my cousin's son returned with a fixed trailer and 2 horses to continue the search for Ace. I also brought my dog Daisy. We split up to cover more ground, and every 2 hours we would meet up. Around 3 in the afternoon, while I was riding around the rim of the steep wooded draw, Daisy suddenly scurried down into the draw. I tied the horse I was riding, Penny, to an old cinder tree and followed Daisy down. The sides of the draw were incredibly steep, and I was struggling to make it down there on foot. For a horse as big as Ace, it would be completely impossible. As I got to the bottom, I could smell something dead, and I immediately knew it was Ace. He had not been touched by predators, but was heavily mutilated. He had the same mutilation as the cattle, with the skin around his eyes being gone, as well as the skin around the lips. However, his back legs were completely free of flesh and was just bone. His ribcage was also opened up, with all of his organs being gone. As I looked around, I could see skeletons of at least 3 cows, and it was obvious that this was some type of dumping ground for whatever did this. I was completely dumbfounded on what had happened. There was no way Ace could have gotten here by himself, so he must have been carefully placed there. I also like to mention that where he was found was a whole 2 miles away from the corrals. Nothing was adding up, and besides, I had just lost my favorite horse. I sadly returned to the spot where me and my cousin's son were going to meet up, and we both rode back to the pickup. After talking to my cousin, we decided not to renew our lease. Our current lease will expire in 2022. My cousin's son spends a lot of time on the internet and thought it sounded very similar to what happened at the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. For the past month, I've been studying what happened, but have been unable to come up with a definitive answer.
I'm half Navajo. For years of my life, I lived on the Navajo Nation reservation in a small town called Shiprock in New Mexico. My Native American side of my family always warned us to be careful at night. My grandparents would always tell me stories of these shape-shifting witches who can curse you, kill you, or mess with you. They called them Skinwalkers because they could take the skin of dead animals and wear them to change into that animal, or something in between a human and animal. Not a werewolf. I never believed in it really. I'm only half Navajo and light-skinned, so I was never treated the same by most people here. so I drifted away from the culture and thought it wasn't for me. If you're a skeptic, that's fine. I was also until I came face to face with things I can't explain. It was around summer. This happens when I was in high school, so about 6 to possibly 8 years ago. I would have been like 15 or 17 then. I used to hang out with a group of guys who like to do a lot of delinquent type stuff. You know, smoke cigarettes, stay up all night with the guys, and playing video games at somebody's house. Then at 3 in the morning, if we felt like it, we would go sneak out to Paradise. I know, it's ironic, the name. It's basically a giant metal pipe that carries irrigation water to all the farms, but really, it was also a spot for kids to drink or get high in the evenings. However, the place did have a scary history of kids and adults who drowned or died in the night. I always thought those were urban legends though. At 3 a.m., that was our time we as boys would test one another to cross this pipe. Sort of an initiation, see how far we could go. We usually could go all the way across. Now, keep in mind that pipe goes well over 3 stories high. It's also wide. I'd say as wide as an average car. And we would walk this thing for kicks in a group of 9 at 3 in the morning. So one night, me and a small group of friends were driving around bored at 2 a.m. wanting to spook each other. So I said, let's go to Paradise and walk the pipe, as most of these friends I was hanging out with had never done anything like that before. They agreed, pumped up on energy drinks, and we drove. It was pretty quiet, the sky was dark, and the night was cold. The boys with me were Michael, Cordy, Tommy, and Theryl. Now, Theryl was the driver because he had the car, and his family was pretty well off too, so he never had to worry about cash. We got to the place and he didn't want to go. Said his parents were traditional, and he just wanted to chill in the car. Basically, he wanted to text some chick, I'm sure, without us bugging him. I told him it's fine, keep the car locked and running in case we see something scary. Then me and the other boys went on without him. I remember we noticed a sheep or goat skin placed flat off to the right, just as we were starting to get on the pipe. We all noticed it looked strange, and I remember someone commenting it looked like a ritual sacrifice. Michael said something about a pentagram, but I wasn't sure if he was just joking or serious, but I thought they were just trying to scare each other. As we got onto the pipe, a few of the guys were scared and had me take the lead. As we crawled, I'd say a quarter of the way onto the pipe, talking and laughing, I noticed a faint whitish or light gray bat bigger than my head flying around us. It dived for us a few times and we dodged it, but then Tommy slipped because of his Converses and almost fell off of the pipe. I reached out to him, grabbing his right arm. Michael had grabbed my shirt collar and Cordy had grabbed him. Altogether, we got back on the pipe and were shaking that we almost lost Tommy into the dark depths below. Suddenly, the bat was gone. We were all freaking out, but the guys wanted to continue. We laughed about it as guys usually do, thinking that was weird. We passed the halfway point on the pipe with no problems, but as we got 3/4 of the way across, Michael saw something. You see, at the end of the pipe there is a hill, and behind that hill is very brightly lit because of a church somewhere off in the distance. Anyways, on that hill, there was a black figure of pointy ears, a dog silhouette. Now, Michael is a tough guy. He yelled at the thing, saying, "I'm not scared of you, you damn Skinwalker," then tossed a few rocks he had in his pocket. One rock hit the pipe, the others fell into the brush below. That shadow silhouette dog stood up on 2 legs like a person. We all freaked out. Jaws dropped, then Cordy said, "Look, another one to the left." Tommy said there's another one on the right. So 3 silhouettes of pointy dog-eared people on the hill. I told them to back up so we can get to the car. The things to the right and the left of the hill started to move down the hill towards us. Now there's just one standing guard on that hill, the one who first stood up. Now we're trying to go back, but we're still 3/4 of the way on the pipe, and under us is complete darkness. It was quiet for a few minutes. Then we started to hear a girl crying. It sounded like she was hurt and scared, almost in pain. We were overcome with a strange feeling of wanting to help. Michael wanted to go back towards the end and crawl down and help this girl. I almost followed too. Inside, I was like, no, this is wrong. Something isn't right. So I yelled at him and everyone, saying, "Are you all stupid? Look at that thing up there on the hill. Did you not see those things? It's a trap. Screw that fake crying. If that girl's hurt, we'll come back when the sun's up in 2 hours and check." Now, the moment I said this, the crying stopped. All the guys freaked out, saying they can't believe what came over them. They said they'd almost forgot what we saw before. Halfway on the pipe now, and we hear a native drum being played like a powwow. We start running on this pipe. A third of the way almost to the car, Corey stops us. We can all hear it under our feet, sounding like a pack of snarling, growling, yelping coyotes. But it's pitch dark below, but we know they are under us. We run full speed, not looking back until we hit the car. We yell drive and haul ass on that dirt road back to a well-lit gas station and explain what happened to Therrell. We couldn't get the girls crying out of our head, and we went back in the daylight just to make sure. We didn't find a girl. Instead, in the area, we listened to a different kind of crying. The sound was a whimper. Then out of the brush, we saw a coyote watching us. It was so close and unafraid of us. It wasn't even shy. I yelled, "You see that? That's the girl that was crying. She probably transformed. It's one of them." I then asked the coyote, "You're a Skinwalker, aren't you?" It just looked at us for 4 seconds, dead in the eye, totally calm, and walked into the brush. We all agreed how unnatural that was for a coyote. We did not go back there after that. My friends in this story I'd like to keep anonymous, so we'll call them M, T, and B. This happened about 3 weeks ago. I'm still shook up from it. My friends and I don't really talk about it, simply because if it's either of the things I think it could be, I know better than to say their names. Anyway, back in April, my friends and I began to plan a camping trip. We had created group chats and we were all super excited about it. I should add that all of us are from northern Michigan. Each of us from different small towns, but still, we do basically everything together. 3 of us, myself included, have always been into cryptic creatures and stories. M actually goes to bed every night listening to stories from channels like this one. T was the only one in our group unfamiliar with cryptics. However, they have always been into dark and creepy stuff. And all of us have heard the stories of the Michigan dogman. My friend B has actually claimed to see one. That being said, we originally planned a camping trip out of state on the back roads of Michigan. An unexpected change of plans, and suddenly we were going to West Virginia. I had never been out of state, so of course I was excited. Plus, Mothman. That's just a cool fricking addition to the excitement. Anyway, upon arriving to West Virginia, the first few nights ended in us staying in hotels, simply because we could find no land to camp on, but what we did find were trails and abandoned bunkers all over on these trails. Our first night, each of us, covered and ready in our tactical gear, went on these trails. I want to say it was around 11 p.m. give or take. Now, let me tell you, the trail we were on had nothing but thick woods next to it on each side. No trails on either side, and without a machete, you weren't getting through those woods. We went inside the first bunker, and like tourists do, we took pictures, laughed, and simply acted like fools because they were incredible. The echo inside was insane. We stayed at the first one for about 15 minutes, and I should add that all of these bunkers are quite some distance apart down this trail. M, who's the oldest and most into crypto stuff, took the lead and left B, T, and myself behind a bit. We could still see him in front of us with the flashlight though. We were close to the second bunker, and suddenly B told T and myself to be quiet. M had abruptly stopped as well. In the woods, and remember what I said about there being no way to get through with tools and no trail there, was suddenly a light, resembling a flashlight, and then we heard talking. Now I would have been okay if it had been people. However, I was looking at my group of friends. M being literally 6 feet away from me on the trail, mouth closed. He hadn't said a word, but that voice was M's voice. It was exactly his voice, but he hadn't said anything. We quickly turned our flashlights off, and I began to head back to the van left at the first bunker. M had already taken off. B and T stayed back a few feet because they stood and listened, and then they panicked as well. As soon as our flashlights went off, and we began heading back to the van trying to understand how the hell M was talking to us from the other side of those thick trees, while also standing 6 feet away from us and without moving his mouth. We were shook up and very confused. Anyways, as soon as our flashlights turned off and we began walking back, whatever was in the woods immediately shut off whatever light they had and started heading towards us, through the woods, fast. We didn't stay to find out what was in the woods. We got out of there. I was terrified. Hearing my friend's voice, who genuinely could not have done that, yell, "Hey," and "Hey, come here," over and over scared me more than I'd like to admit. Later that night, we ended up getting lost, and I should probably add that these trails are close to military property. But anyways, we were headed back to the hotel and ended up lost on back roads. All of us still trying to figure it out without freaking out even more. We made it back, thankfully. The next day, we decided we were heading to Pennsylvania. Now, the creature I'm about to talk about, I'll never say out loud. Never. It terrifies me beyond belief and makes my anxiety skyrocket by just the thought. B and M had been dating for quite some time. They have a lot of mutual friends. One of their mutual friends is a resident in a small town in Pennsylvania. A few months back, this mutual friend had gone out to help a farmer who claimed to hear a little girl yelling for help in the woods. Mutual friend took a group of men with them. Long side story short, they came across what they believed to be a wendigo imitating a child to get a poor soul alone in the woods. They loaded it up with bullets until it screeched and ran off. Mutual friend sent audio recordings to B&M. Obviously, my friends were intrigued, as were T and myself. I was scared, but curious. Here's where things get bad. Our first night. B is inside paying for the hotel rooms. T, M, and myself are outside. T and I are joking and screwing around while M looked for what he needed in the back of the van. I told T to never, ever call out for the creature, but ignorance is bliss and curiosity really does kill. Without missing a beat, T yells, "Hey, Wendigo!" And I immediately ran inside, while even M looked at him like he was crazy. Nothing happened that night. We enjoyed our hotel and got rested up because we planned on hiking the next day. We went out to state land on a nature preserve pretty popular for Bigfoot sightings. We were excited. B and M took the left side of the trail to find a camping spot, while T and I took the right side. The woods felt heavy, almost eerie. I constantly felt watched. We had walkie-talkies, and after hiking about halfway up the side of this mountain, we met at a creek that ran directly down the middle. I should add that B has a lot of medical problems, a bad hip being one of them. So M and T wanted to head up to the top of the mountain, and I stayed back with B. They called us on the walkie-talkies and told us about skeletal animal remains with snapped ribs and ripped and tattered clothing they'd found. We headed back towards the van because T had taken my water in his backpack by accident. B and myself stopped to rest on a rock, and after about 5 minutes we heard what sounded like a muffled huff. My dad is a hunter, so I know what wild animals sound like when they grunt or huff. This sounded like a deer, a very large deer. We looked around for a moment, however, we saw nothing and heard nothing more. We made it back to the van. T had started to come back down the mountain towards the van. From across the river, he saw a few locals and figured it'd be best to leave before causing a disruption. M had continued and was adventuring side trails. B and I were sitting patiently in the van, trying to catch our breath and recover from the sun. After about 20 to 25 minutes of silence, B radioed in M to do a location check and make sure he was okay. Before he could respond, I noticed him running towards the van, fast, very fast. I stood up and T came busting out of the trail. T could barely breathe and was visibly scared. T was shaking and ended up dry heaving because of the running. Upon questioning T, he told us that on his way down the mountain he had stopped to take some pictures of the creek and wildlife, and from behind him he heard a voice call out, "Hey, come here." He didn't respond. T thought it was just one of the locals he had seen earlier. Suddenly the voice called out again, "T, come here." It said T's name. He took off and didn't look back. M was the last one left in the woods, and by this point we were all scared. It was only our second night out of Michigan. Could whatever was in West Virginia have followed us? M ended up finding very large deer hoof prints, the size of his boot heel, a size 13 wide I should add. I was still trying to comfort T and get his breathing back to normal when M appeared through the opening on the trail. M was confused upon arrival. He looked at all of us funny. B asked him, "What's up, babe?" And he told us that he thought he would have seen us at the end of the trail, not in the van. He heard B and T talking in the woods and headed towards him, yet none of us went back into the woods. B was worried and waiting for M's return while I helped T. To conclude the story, I should add that I am a witch. I've been practicing since around age 13. T was afraid, and he's been my best friend for almost 10 years. It felt necessary to protect him. I just didn't know how necessary. As we headed back into town, T fell asleep in the car. M stayed with him just to be safe. B and myself went inside to get everyone Taco Bell. While we were getting our food, T woke up abruptly and immediately began shaking and panicking. Whatever spoke to him in the woods visited him in his dreams. When I got back out to the van, he was a mess, and when he told me about how vivid the dream was, even I was scared. I don't feel comfortable sharing the dream because it's not mine to share, but I can tell you, it was vivid and it was detailed and bone-chilling. I did what I could with what I had available for protection spells and charms, and since that last night after the incident, nothing else of nature has happened to him. I also put protection spells over B and M. I'm very protective of my friends. I love them each dearly and each for different reasons. That being said, I have an idea of what happened in each of those woods those 2 nights, but I can't be certain. What I do know is that these creatures are very real and they've changed my best friend. Someone who once loved the night and is now as scared when an animal crosses the road. If anyone has any idea or can validate my idea, please leave a comment. And please be adventurous, but be safe.
My good friend moved in next door about 6 years ago. He's married and has 3 kids. I have 2. Our families get along very well and we go on trips quite often. Sometimes we like to go camping out into the woods. That is the setting for this Skinwalker story. My friend's wife picked the location. She's part Navajo and thought it would be fun to go camping on the reservation. Unfortunately, that is exactly what we did. The area that she procured for us was pretty nice. It had a nice little flat area where we could put our tents up, but it was also surrounded by trees. This was nice because it felt like we had a sense of privacy within the trees. We were going to be there for 3 days, so we set up camp and had a good time. During the setup of camp, however, we let the kids run around, and as long as they stayed within earshot, we didn't mind where they went. While putting the finishing touches on the rainfly for my tent, one of my kids returns back to campsite with bones. Thankfully, these were obviously not human bones, but that of a large animal, probably a cow or a horse. I told the kids that this is really gross and they shouldn't be playing with dead animal parts. They reluctantly agreed and went back to playing out in the woods while we finished putting the final touches on the campsite. We got a fire going and started cooking up dinner. The sun was beginning to set, but because of the trees nearby, it was already pretty dark where we were. About halfway through dinner, I began to feel this very weird sensation coming from the woods. I had this feeling that I needed to go to the woods, but I obviously didn't want to go. Something was telling me subconsciously that I needed to go in the woods, and by myself. It was almost hypnotizing in a way. For some reason, my attention was drawn to a particular spot in the forest. I stood up and shined my flashlight in that direction. Obviously, nothing was there other than dense brush. This did catch everyone's attention, and they asked me what I was doing. I played it off how I saw a raccoon in the forest and wanted to see it better. Everyone thought this was amusing, except for my friend's wife, who was part Navajo. I could tell the way she looked at me, she knew I wasn't telling the truth. We then soon later finished our dinner and put more logs on the fire, since we were now immersed fully in the darkness of the night. I then began to develop a sense of unease coming from the forest. I felt as if there was a predator nearby, and my survival instincts tried to kick in, but my logical mind told me that I was just being paranoid and I had no true reason to feel unsafe. I was with people I knew and loved, and my friend and I did bring means to protect ourselves from animals or anything else for that matter. I had my shotgun and my friend had his pistol that he normally carries with him. I had no true reason to feel unsafe, and yet here I was. The group decides to tell ghost stories around the campfire, as we usually do on our camping trips. This is normally one of my favorite parts of the campout. But, due to how I was feeling, I was already on edge and didn't really want to do this at this time. But I didn't want to ruin everyone's fun, so I kept quiet. During the stories, rather than listening to them, I tried to listen to the sounds of the forest all around us. The normal sounds of the wildlife at night was replaced by dead silence. This is never a good sign. About halfway through my friend's favorite ghost story, we all heard what sounded like a scream. This scream sounded like it came from pretty deep in the woods, but it was too close for comfort. I stood up with my flashlight in hand and recommended that me and my friend go investigate what that sound was. My wife was the first one to shoot down that idea. Yeah, right, and leave us all here by ourselves? Yeah, that was pretty stupid, I admitted. My wife's friend then told us about the forest nearby and how sometimes they could be haunted with spirits of the forest or even inhabited by skinwalkers. At this time, all the kids seemed to be on the verge of tears, so we recommended to do something more lighthearted. My friend grabbed his guitar from his truck and began to play songs. My friend was very average at playing the guitar, yet he thought he was the best. But this did help us switch from a scary situation to a more lighthearted one. And soon enough, we had all forgotten about the scream coming from the forest. We called it a night and everyone went into their tents to go to bed. Me and my friend stayed up and made sure that the fire went out. After 30 minutes of talking, the fire was now coals and the visibility was very low. I had that hypnotizing feeling coming again from the woods. Instead of seeing the dark, empty forest, I was then greeted by the hideous sight of what looked like a horse. My unease was replaced by confusion. What was a horse doing in the middle of the woods? I got up to get a closer look, and the horse slowly receded back into the woods. Luckily, I had my flashlight on me, and I shined it on the animal. This horse was not normal. It looked very ill, and its limbs were almost bent at weird angles. It wasn't until I was practically in the woods until I got a good view of it. Not only did this horse appear to be ill, it almost looked like it was deceased in a way. Parts of flesh and bone were sticking out of parts of the animal that should not have been possible. My initial thought was maybe that this horse was a victim of a bear attack, or even a cougar. I turned back and went back to camp, and I told my friend what I had seen. He was very uneasy by what I just told him. He then gave me the weirdest advice. He told me to not think about it, not even to talk about it ever again, or at least still while we were out in the woods. I agreed and we went to bed. I was then awakened by my friend and his wife at 7 in the morning. We were told that we were no longer allowed to stay on the land and that we were not welcomed by the natives. I was frustrated and a little bit annoyed since my friend's wife was responsible for procuring the campsite for us to camp on. I got up and woke up my wife and my kids and told them to pack up and that we were cutting our camp trip short. They were just as annoyed as I was, but as soon as we stepped out of our tent, our frustration was replaced by fear. What littered our campsite is what appeared to be bits and pieces of animals. Most of the pieces were on the ground, while other pieces were hung up in trees, hanging off branches. The sight was pretty gruesome. It looked like a bomb had gone off, and bits and pieces of meat were everywhere. I can honestly tell you, that was the quickest my family has ever packed up our campsite. While packing up, I took a few seconds to look around, and I looked at the footprints on the ground, maybe getting an idea of who had done this. The only thing that I could see were hoof prints. We were packed up and ready to leave, and we took off from the campsite. The sun wasn't even out yet, so it was still kind of dark. While driving out of our campsite, I swear, despite the low visibility, I was able to make out a figure in the woods. And it wasn't that horse. It was something tall, something malevolent, something I'm glad we didn't stick around to see. We both get home after driving the long trip back to our houses. My wife agrees to cook everyone breakfast while I decide to put everything away. We were in such a hurry of packing that most of our stuff in the back was just thrown in there and not really organized at all. I'm about 15 minutes into putting things away when I pull up parts of the tent. As I pull it out of the trunk of the car, a white piece of material falls out and lands on the floor. I look down and I realize that we had accidentally packed a bone of one of the animals that was strewn about our campsite. It was just a creepy reminder of our experience, nothing more. Or so I thought. It takes me another 30 more minutes and everything's finally packed and put away. I go back inside and I have my breakfast, or whatever was left over from everyone else. This is the part of the story where I wish this was the end and I could say happily ever after, but unfortunately, this is where everything began. I need to describe to you our street that we live on. Like I said, my friend and I are neighbors, but he lives across the street. But the road we live on is pretty secluded and has a lot of trees on it. Anyways, my friend and I decided to take our families into town and to spend the rest of the weekend in town doing fun things. The weekend went by faster than it normally does. That's probably because we had a great time. We returned from the town after our failed camping trip. I pull into the driveway, and to my dismay, the front door to our house is off its hinges. I tell my family to wait over at my friend's house while I investigate the damage. The front door is off its hinges and in the bushes on our front yard. There are long scratch marks around the door handle and around the corners of the door. The door also has puncture marks which are pretty deep. My guess looked like it was a bear trying to enter our home. Maybe we left some food out or something and it tried to get in. The real question is the creature still in my home? After a brief search of the house with my trusty shotgun, I found nothing to conclude that the animal was still in our home. However, I did find paw marks along the house. The paw marks didn't lead to any area that contained food, including the kitchen or dining area. Instead, they led to my bedroom, almost directly, as if it went nowhere else. As if it knew exactly where to go and what it wanted to do. I inspected my bedroom, and to my horror, I found a couple of objects that were not there before. There was a small circle of bones in the center of my bedroom. What are the odds of a bear bringing in bones to my home and placing them accidentally in a circle in my room? This made some sense with my bear theory, but the other objects in my room did not. Inside the circle of bones was a bundle of twigs that were bound together by rope in the shape of a person. The bundle of twigs had feathers and other objects attached to it that looked very strange. Next to that was a burning candle. Whatever it was, whether it was a Navajo kid playing a prank on us or an actual Skinwalker, I was pretty terrified. I was about to investigate the room further when I heard a scream come from across the street. Not just one scream, but many. I run outside with my shotgun in hand and I go across the street to meet my friend and my family. Before I can even cross the street, they all come running towards me, pointing to the back of the house, telling me that it got her! Out of this moment of chaos and confusion, my friend somehow manages to scream to me that some creature grabbed his daughter and dragged her into the woods. My friend and I then go into the woods looking for the creature and his daughter. We are not even in the woods for 5 minutes when we see what looks like his daughter just standing in the middle of the woods. Her hair is disheveled and her limbs are bent at weird angles, much like the horse on our camping trip. I begin to feel very uncomfortable. My friend, being overwhelmed with emotion, runs over to what appears to be his daughter and picks her up. He then begins asking her, "Are you okay, sweetie? Are you okay? What happened?" The girl begins to give responses, but it sounds as if she had water in her lungs. It was very unusual considering we were in the middle of the woods. The child appears to be injured, but is giving no signs that she's actually hurt. As we're walking back, I start to begin to think that maybe this little girl that he's carrying isn't his daughter. We both emerge out of the woods and both families are elated that we finally found a daughter. We were only gone for about 15 minutes. But in lieu of everything that has happened, they were pretty terrified the whole time we were away. My friend finally sets down his daughter, and I'm horrified at the sight of her. I was unable to get a good look at her while we were in the woods, but now that we were in good lighting, I could get a good look at her eyes. Her eyes were milky white, much like a blind person's eyes. I only note that because this girl's known for having very bright blue eyes. As the chaos is slowly settling and our families are finally getting a grip, I try to get my friend to talk with me in a lone, private area. I try to tell him, "Hey man, something's wrong with your daughter. She doesn't look like herself." We talk for a few minutes, kind of heatedly, and we finally conclude that we will take her into the hospital in the morning. Just with everything that's been going on lately, both families felt like they needed a rest. Anyways, I am finally able to go back to my home and clean up the mess and finally bring my family over. I put a tarp over the doorway so we'll have something covering the front end of our house. I don't tell my family what I saw in the house earlier, and I don't tell them what I think what's going on with the daughter. This is something I felt maybe I should have done differently. My family and I finally turn in for the night, and we go to bed. We're pretty exhausted, so sleep comes pretty easily for us. My family and I get much needed sleep. I sleep in until about 10, and then I wake up and make my way over to my friend's house. I knock on his door. No answer. I call and text his phone. Also no answer. That's pretty strange. Maybe they're at the hospital already and we're pretty busy. I spend the rest of the day just doing other things and not thinking about what had happened this last weekend. Sure enough, time passes and 2 days go by without my friend getting in contact with me. This is very unusual considering he and I and our families are very close. Now I thought about it, I actually haven't seen him or his family since he brought home that little girl that looked like his daughter. I told myself if I didn't see them in 3 days, I'd call the police. Just before that time, however, sure enough, my friend emerges from his home. Except something's different. Something's wrong. My friend's head is kind of at a weird angle. His neck looks bent and his limbs are kind of contorted in different directions. His eyes are milky white. He tells me that I should come over and bring the whole family over. We'll have a great time. He doesn't sound like himself. He sounds like he's speaking out of an old, staticky radio. I tell him, sure thing, let me just go grab my family, and I head back inside. During this time, I decide to call the police and report a missing persons. That thing was not my friend. It was something that is imitating him. Sure enough, the police come about 2 hours later and I fill out a report. During that time, the police decide to take the liberty to go investigate the house of my friend. While the police are investigating, more police cars show up, as well as a fire truck and an ambulance. The police didn't disclose any information until about 2 weeks later, where I found out that my friend's family had disappeared. They told me that the case was still ongoing since they didn't find any bodies, but they have found enough pieces to conclude that they're most likely dead. The official police reports say that my friend and his family were dragged off by a bear of some kind and eaten out in the woods. But something tells me, deep down, that that's not the case. I live in northern Washington, near a ton of woods, and one day, me and 3 of my friends, Aaron, Jake, and Kyle, made plans to go camping in the woods since we all loved the outdoors and just wanted to get away from it all. My friend Jake knew these woods the best and said that he had a great spot for us to go camping, so we all got our stuff and headed into the woods. It took us 2 hours to get to the spot, which was perfect, and we got our stuff set up. After we set up our stuff, we ate and decided that we wanted to go exploring, with Jake leading the way. Everything was going great. We were going to go a lot further than I've ever gone in these woods, and eventually we made it to a clearing. That's when Jake started to act different. I didn't really think anything at first. I just blew it off as him being weird. As we walked across the clearing, I saw a grayish human thing walk into the woods on the far side. But again, I just blew it off since I didn't want to get them riled up for no reason. We were about 3/4 of the way across this clearing when we saw a mutilated deer laying there. When I say mutilated, I mean it was cut clean in half with its head completely missing and parts of its skin ripped clean off. What made everyone so uneasy was the fact that there were no flies around this carcass at all, and it was still warm. I instantly thought to that thing I saw in the woods and told them about it. Aaron said he saw it too, but he thought he was seeing things also. I then got the unshakable feeling that I was being watched, and I could see that everyone else was creeped out. We all decided to go back to camp, and since it was getting late, we decided that we would go to the clearing some other time. That's when I heard the sound of someone running up really fast. I turned around and there was nothing there. I tell my friends that we should hurry and leave because I don't want to go out anymore. They agreed, and we started jogging through the woods with the sun setting. We didn't think that we would be in the woods for so long, so no one brought a flashlight, and it was getting dark fast. About 20 minutes into our jog back to camp, we hear that blood-curdling scream coming no less than 50 meters away. At this point, we are running through the woods, and it is getting darker every minute. That's when we hear a weird growl off to the side of us, rustling and twigs snapping. I'm terrified at this point, and we are all sprinting through the woods back to this site. We finally make it back and tear into our tent, with all of us hyperventilating. None of us say anything for about 5 minutes, when Jake says, "Let's get out of here." Right after he says that, we hear a "Let's get out of here" right outside of the tent. Everyone is beyond terrified at this point. We have no idea what to do. We sit there in complete silence, and we hear 2 sets of footsteps going around our campsite, throwing our stuff around. One of the things even tries to open the tent, but I hold the zipper down with all the force I can muster. Literally everyone is crying at this point. Eventually, those things leave, but we were too scared to even go near the door. About 3 hours of trying to figure out what just happened, Jake decides he's going to check outside to make sure the coast is clear so we can get out of here. I decide to go with him, since I didn't want him to get killed. When he opened the door, we stepped out. He shined the flashlight into the woods, and we saw 3 of those things staring right back at us. Their eyes were huge and sunken in, but also pitch black. They were about 6 feet tall and lanky. When they noticed that we saw them, they ran faster than anything I've ever seen run into the forest. Jake and I booked it back to the tent and told Kyle and Aaron what just happened. Aaron became hysterical and came up with a brilliant idea to run back to get to the car and get out of there. I tried to stop him, but he was going to run on pure fear and booked it into the woods. We had no choice but to go looking for him, since those things were probably still out there. As we are grabbing our flashlights, we hear him scream in the distance, followed by a loud growl. We ran out of the tent and began searching for him, and spent the next 20 minutes looking. Kyle begs us to go back to the campsite, since we kept hearing something walking in the woods really close behind us. We get back to the campsite to find Aaron standing facing towards the tent, his back towards us. Jake starts to cry and says, "What were you thinking? You're so stupid." Aaron then robotically turns and says, "Haha, don't worry guys, I'm fine." We all look at each other, but we decide to get back into the tent for safety. Jake says that it's best for us just to wait it out over the night and leave in the morning. I then notice bruises and cuts all on Aaron's arms and legs, and when I asked him about it, he only said, "Haha, don't worry guys, I'm fine." Aaron kept saying that the exact same way. We all just tried to ignore him and get through the night alive. The rest of the night we heard those things walking around our campsite, and Aaron kept asking if we wanted to go back out there for some stupid reason, like, "Hey, I saw the sweet rock back out in the woods. You want to go see it?" After an eternity, morning came and the noises stopped. We all began sprinting to the car when about 20 minutes in, I noticed Aaron wasn't to be seen. Since my other friends were still running, I didn't want to fall behind, and I kept moving. We finally made it back to the car, and we all agreed that Aaron was probably gone. We sped home and swore to never talk about this to anyone ever again. We told Aaron's mom that he walked off in the middle of the night, and we couldn't find him. We were investigated about 6 months on and on, but they couldn't find any proof or motive that we would have wanted to kill him. We tried helping with the search, but nothing came of it. To this day, late at night,
When I hear anything off in the woods, I think of Aaron.